Well, you may have heard about the landmark trial of Vernon Hershberger. This happened in Wisconsin, and Vernon Hershberger is a raw milk dairy farmer. We've got on the phone Elizabeth Rich, and she's with an organization, Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Isn't it strange that in America we have to have a fund set up to defend people who are trying to go from a farm to a consumer? But that's the world we live in, and we're grateful that they're there to help make that happen. And so we've got on the phone Elizabeth Rich, who is both a lawyer and a farmer, and she is vice president of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us.
Well, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
And congratulations on the victory. It's a victory not only for you and for Vernon, but it's really a victory for all of us. Everyone who likes to get fresh, wholesome food and likes to be able to make decisions about what they eat rather than having somebody else make that decision for them. I'd like to talk to you about this, particularly about Vernon Hershberger. What was it that he was doing that was so odious to the government that they would try to hit him with several felony charges?
They were misdemeanor charges, but it was the first time that a raw milk farmer has been prosecuted criminally in the state of Wisconsin. Our laws are set up so that there are both civil and criminal penalties available to the government for the same violation. So they could have pursued this civilly and had a much easier case to prove. Mm-hmm. Instead, they pursued it criminally for the first time. And I believe that.
And you say they were not felonies, they were misdemeanors? Because I thought that there were like 4 felonies and they acquitted him on 3, but got him on 1. But they were
all misdemeanors, 4 charges, 4 misdemeanor charges, but they did carry penalties of more than a year of incarceration. So it was a serious charge.
That's great. So that's great that you beat that now. So the precedent was that they were coming after him with criminal charges for the first time. So tell us what they charged him with and how this all began.
He was charged with operating a retail food establishment without a license, selling and distributing milk without a milk producer license, operating a dairy plant, which is where yogurt, butter, cheese, that kind of thing is made without a license, and violating a hold order that was placed on food during a raid conducted in 2010. Mm-hmm. And you asked what was so odious about this. The case was all about raw milk, but the way the government characterized it was this is a very simple, uncomplicated case. It's a licensure violation. And during the trial, the prosecution brought up several times that for $260, Vernon could have gotten a retail food establishment license. But of course, he couldn't have gotten a license for what he was doing. There was no license for what he was doing.
Right. That's kind of like telling somebody that they can sell marijuana if they get a license for it.
That's a good analogy.
Well, actually, it was another attorney that made the analogy, said this is essentially like prohibition, except it's not about alcohol. It's about raw milk, something as innocuous as raw milk.
That's right, and we've scratched our heads over this a lot. Why is it, for instance, that guns are involved? Why do we show up at this farm and other farms with armed law enforcement officers?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us exactly what happened at the raid, because I think people would want to know that. I'm sure it was quite an ordeal for Vernon and anybody that happened to be there at the time.
It was an ordeal for Vernon, his wife, and their 10 children, some of whom are very young. Mm. It's very confusing to have deputies show up and order your father around and treat him like a criminal, which is what happened. The first raid was in August of 2009, and at that time, 2 inspectors showed up along with several representatives of the health department, and they went through the facility, noticed all of the products and inventoried them, and came back, so they knew what was there. There were no surprises. Then in 2010, a year later, the big raid came, and that was with the guns and the law enforcement officers. I think there might have been 11 people, counting the inspectors and law enforcement at the farm.
Did they show up was it like a SWAT team raid? Was it like a no-knock thing, or just a lot of people showing up?
It was like a SWAT team thing. Yeah. Cars descending, no notice, mm-hmm. and what they did, it's just the whole approach is so heavy-handed. They there's a video that we showed during the trial of the inspector ruining 2,000 pounds of milk, just dumping dye into it to denature it. And at the end of the bulk tank is Vernon's oldest son, who's in charge of the milking. These are the fruits of his labor personally, and one of the younger boys. And the looks on their faces are just so striking. They're watching the destruction of God's gift to their family and their members.
That's just criminal. That's just criminal.
It was pointless, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And just kind of mean-spirited. And that's how the whole thing felt to us, and I think to the jury.
And, you know, you're talking about how they repeated over and over again that it was a $280 license fee. Why do they have to show up with a SWAT team? Why do they have to destroy so much property if that's the case?
Well, that's right. And if it is, as they said, just all about a simple license, then why all this commotion? And good heavens, taxpayer expense. There were 4 government lawyers at every hearing, and there must have been 9 hearings. Wow. Just a tremendous expenditure of resources.
So when was this raid? When did this happen?
The raid was June 2nd, 2010.
Okay, so this has been going on for 3 years. What's his status been for the last 3 years? Did they shut his business down?
Well, I have to speak carefully on that.
Oh, okay.
If he had stayed in business, it would have constituted bail jumping, which would be more charges.
But it was an ordeal because this drug out for 3 years. He, you know, it completely disrupted his life and his family's life for 3 years. And as you mentioned, they've got multiple state attorneys showing up and everything, working on this for 3 years.
That's right. We, when they turned over, as they have to in a criminal case, all of their investigative findings and documents, and there were 6,000 documents plus 22 CDs of more documents and videos and other findings. They hired a computer forensic specialist after they took his computer in the raid and analyzed it. Hired this computer forensic expert to analyze it. He said he worked on it for years. The analysis. I can't imagine what that must have cost.
It's just amazing. We see this over and over again. And, you know, when it comes to the war on drugs, I'm not a drug user and I don't care, but I don't want to see the loss of freedom that we see of people, the loss of choice, and the massive amount of money that is spent on the war on drugs. And for so many years, we've seen that used as a vanguard to take away our privacy, to take away so many of our freedoms. And now they're moving into other areas like raw milk. It's just amazing to see this happening to a raw milk farmer, what we've seen happening and decried happening to people who are marijuana users, because they changed from the drug pushers under Reagan, they changed from the drug pushers to the end users. And now we're seeing this happening with raw milk. It's amazing.
It is.
Well, tell us some of the arguments that the prosecution brought up at the trial. I know they made a pretty amazing statement about his income. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what the prosecution was trying to do was portray Vernon as a greedy, money-grubbing person who was motivated by money in his law-breaking lifestyle. That, I think, was the goal.
Character assassination.
We expected that going in, and we knew it was going to backfire because Vernon Hershberger is the most humble, generous person I've ever met. So what they did was they took they had, in the raid, they had confiscated all of his receipts and invoices, and they were putting those up, and he had monthly records of his totals that were run through the cash register. And he had made a notation. He had taken off the sales tax. He paid sales tax, which the state also thought was a big indication that he was running a huge operation. But his sales tax was between $1 and $450.
Yeah, that's a pretty small operation.
Because in Wisconsin, we don't pay tax on food except for certain junk foods and prepackaged foods. But for milk, yogurt, butter, we don't pay tax. So he was paying sales tax on soap, handmade soap, and products like that. But he was subtracting the amount of sales tax paid, and then he wrote net monthly income. And they were trying to say that was his net income. So it was in the $20,000 range. So they were saying, look at all this money he's making. Well, any farmer knows that you spend a huge amount of money to run your farming operation, to purchase hay and equipment, and everything is so expensive. So,
well, any business, that's true of any business. There's a huge amount of difference between the gross take and the net income. I mean, Alex has talked about that. We might take in, I think the figure he had was $7 million, but it's all gone. And if you're an individual businessman like Alex, a lot of times you go without even taking a salary for a while to keep the organization going. So there's a huge difference between, and people don't really understand all of the hidden costs and expenses unless you're the person actually doing the books, actually running the business.
Well, and in Vernon's case, when we asked him, gee, Vernon, don't you understand the difference between gross and net? And he did a little bit, but not a lot. And he said, when we asked him on the stand, why did you write net when it meant gross? He said, well, I guess that's my 8th grade education. And he just, he was doing the best he could, but
right.
He's not very sophisticated in financial matters. So the state was misleading the jury to say that his income was $20,000 a month. In fact, he makes, his income tax returns show that he makes between $40,000 and $50,000 a year, and that's for a family of 12, which the federal poverty guidelines indicate $95,000 is the poverty line for a family of 12.
Wow, and they prosecuted.
45 to 50.
That's amazing. And they prosecuted a farmer like that with 10 kids for 3 years. They harassed him just because he was selling raw milk. Well, let me ask you about what you offered as a defense and how you think the jury saw this. Because clearly he hadn't paid the $280 fee, but he was also couldn't get a license to sell that because they wouldn't give him a license to sell raw milk. So do you see this as a kind of a jury nullification of a bad law going against raw milk producers? How do you see this verdict?
I think that in this case it was not a nullification verdict, although there were certainly some grassroots efforts to educate county residents about their power to nullify. Mm-hmm. I think that in this case, what the defense's theory was that, and this was supported by testimony from every regulator we put on the stand, is that in Wisconsin, dairy farmers can consume their own products without the need for any licenses whatsoever. So Vernon had attempted to comply. He knew this, and he had with his own documents attempted to set up a structure so that all of his members were in fact owners of his farm, mm-hmm. and therefore did not need a license to consume the products. That was his intent, and the documents, we presented the documents with redactions. There was a lot of evidence we were not able to bring in. There were constant skirmishes, and most of the rulings went the state's way on what we could not introduce. We couldn't speak the words raw milk. I don't know if you heard about that.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, tell us about that.
We were not allowed. The judge continually said, this case is not about raw milk, and that's what the state said. It's not about raw milk. Of course, it was about raw milk.
Yeah.
But we weren't allowed to speak the words. So
that's amazing. That's amazing.
So
well, I've heard
a lot of dancing.
I've heard stranger stories. I mean, we had a guy who defended himself in New Jersey because he was going to do it on the jury nullification straight up. And it's actually in the state constitution in New Jersey that jurors have not only the right, but the responsibility to judge the law as well as the facts of the case. And he had a gag order put on him from one of the judges, but he still got it out, and he still was acquitted the first time, 7-5, actually as a hung jury. They came after him a second time, and the second time the judge let him actually hold up the New Jersey law and show the New Jersey law to the jurors, and when he did that, he got a unanimous acquittal. So,
wow.
It's amazing the things that judges will and won't let into the courts, but you're a lawyer. You know that better than we do. So let me ask you then, since this wasn't necessarily I wouldn't characterize it as a jury nullification because they did find him guilty on one charge, which I would imagine if they didn't agree with the law at all, they would have let him go on that one as well. What do you think the precedent is that this sets, or does it set a precedent?
It's in Wisconsin. Of course, it's Wisconsin only, and so any legal precedent would affect Wisconsin law, not the laws of other states. Mm-hmm. It's also a criminal case, so the precedential effect might be somewhat more curtailed because the state had to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. So the fact that they failed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't necessarily mean that the law is as the defense presented presented its theory, if you can follow that. But I think, for me, the message is the important thing here, the message to regulators in Wisconsin and in other states, because Mr. Hershberger's supporters came to Little Baraboo, Wisconsin from both coasts and dozens of states in between, and they came to support him when he was taking a stand for food freedom. That, to me, is the significance, and for the people's right to opt out of the industrialized food supply and for the people's right to decide what they are going to consume.
Yes. Absolutely. There was a lot of grassroots support. We had an InfoWars listener who basically set up interviews that Leanne McAdoo used in her report. He interviewed, I think it was Liz Reitzig with Milk Freedom, Raw Milk Freedom. Anyway, he interviewed Michael Badnarik and another lawyer who had been in a very large case in California. And I know there were a lot of people there supporting him, just as you said. So I think that was a pretty important message.
Right. I think we really want to focus regulatory attention on this issue. In my opinion, I feel that if the Founding Fathers had thought for a moment that government would try to take our right to consume the food of our choice and the medicine of our choice, that would have been the First Amendment. That would absolutely have been the First Amendment, that we have a fundamental right to consume the food of our choice. And
I'm sure they didn't even think about it, because it's something that wouldn't even have occurred to you and I a couple of decades ago, that the government would be that overreaching, that overbearing to do something like that.
Yeah, I think it's a clear case of too much government, and I hear it again and again from people who aren't normally politically very interested, but this is an issue that interests them, and so that, to me, is the important precedent here. I really hope that, because we've seen this heavy-handed enforcement all across the country, not just in Wisconsin. I'd really like to see the government pick up the message that I think is being sent, which is stay away from our food supply.
That's right. When you start talking about, we start telling people what they can eat and drink, you start even getting the attention of couch potatoes because they sit on the couch and they eat stuff. So when you start dictating that to them, you get even their attention, even people who aren't typically paying attention. Tell us a little bit about the bigger fight that you've got with your organization. Tell us a little bit about your organization and other issues besides raw milk that you're involved in.
The Farm to Consumer Legal Foundation was set up in 2007, and the ultimate goal was to level the playing field a bit. The government has unlimited legal resources, essentially, and farmers typically are on a pretty tight budget, and they don't have extra money to spend on lawyers.
Absolutely.
So for the purchase of a $150 membership, our farmers can apply. It's not automatic, but they can apply for representation, and we try to take as many as we can. And the goal is just to help any farmer who is being pursued by the government unfairly. So we have zoning cases. We had we have a hotline set up that farmers can call in. I got a call on the hotline last month from someone in Colorado whose wife had a breastfed baby, exclusively breastfed baby, and she had been charged with grazing in the municipal right-of-way because her cows got out. Her cows got out, and her cows got out, and the sheriff told her to round them up, and she did round them up and put them away. But they came and arrested her and put her in handcuffs and took her to jail and told her husband she couldn't come back until she saw a judge in the morning. And here he's got this crying baby.
Oh, man.
So I called the sheriff's office and laid into them for doing that, and they wound up letting her go. But that's the kind of, we get these calls. We had another call. Some farmers were hosting a farm-to-table dinner, and the regulators showed up and started dumping bleach on the food.
Oh, man.
And one of my colleagues, Gary Cox, told her to ask them if they had a warrant, and if they didn't, tell them to leave. And they did, and they were able to save some of the food and keep the event going.
Wow. That's just amazing.
These are the kinds of things.
Well,
yeah, we're seeing
great.
This all across the country.
That's a great organization, and like you said, it's nationwide. It reminds me of what homeschoolers had to do with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. They had to band together and for their common defense in court. And so it's great that you're doing that for farmers. I really appreciate that. It's wonderful that you've got a background as both a farmer and as a lawyer, and that you're stepping up to do that for people. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for doing that, and hopefully other states are going to see this, and it'll publicize it for both consumers and for the government regulatory agencies that wish to take that choice away from consumers.
Yes, I hope so too.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for talking to us, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. And we'd also like to thank Bregan Fuller, who went to the trial and recorded interviews with Liz Reitzig, Michael Badnarik, and other people there. Thank you so much for caring and for being an activist. And if you want to get involved with people, you can always go to Planet InfoWars, where you can find other activists and like-minded people there. And don't forget to go to Prison Planet TV. Your subscription helps us to fund this operation, and up to 10 people can view it simultaneously with you. So you can have actually 11 people watching the news simultaneously. It really helps to fund our operation, and it helps to get the information out there. Well, that's it for tonight, but don't forget that we're going to be having live coverage from Bilderberg next week. We're going to have a Bilderberg site coming online in the next day or so that's going to consolidate all of our coverage and information about Bilderberg. So stay tuned. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Many anthropologists and archaeologists believe that before man even discovered the power to harness and use fire, we were involved in agrarian activities. That is, taking the seeds of plants and then replanting them to produce more. The very foundation of our modern civilization and human culture is centered around the planting and cultivation of edible plants, fruits, vegetables, nuts, you name it. And the globalists have been going after gardening. They've been harassing people that have gardens in their front yards or their backyards. They've called for licenses for people to have gardens because you can't trust prisoners in the police state America to be able to grow their own food. That's why I've come to the realization that we need to become self-sufficient. You need to be informed. You need to have the Second Amendment to protect yourself. You need to be politically active to wake up others. You need to filter your water. But you also need to plant a garden. Even if you live in an apartment, you can do this. If you live in the countryside, obviously you can do it on a grand scale. There are so many green belts in areas that humans don't even visit, nearby cities and in suburbs, where people are now more and more planting their own little private gardens and meadows and off the side of the road. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a revolutionary act to unplug from the television, to unplug from the computer and all the globalist propaganda, and to go out in your backyard or your front yard or planters at your apartment or on the roof of the building where you live, and to plant a garden.
Here are some of the amazing deals at InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com. The Survival Seed Vault by My Patriot Supply features only the finest survival heirloom seeds for a robust and hardy garden, even in the toughest of times. The ARC All-in-One Seed Kit contains 70 varieties of 50,000 seeds of fruits, vegetables, medicinal, and culinary herbs. All ARC seeds are heirloom. Each type is labeled and sealed separately for ease of use and longevity. The Deluxe Emergency Seed Bank combines 3 of Emergency Seed Bank's top sellers: the Family Survival Emergency Seed Bank, the Medicinal Herb Seeds Pack, and the Culinary Herb Seeds Pack. We also have starter varieties of the deluxe seed packages for fruit, salad, salsa, peppers, and medicinal herbs and more. Go to the InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com.
A little seed can grow a huge tree that produces fruit for up to 50 years. We have the best life bombs. That's what these are. We have the best weapons against death out there at the lowest prices, waiting for you to lovingly plant them and lovingly grow them and lovingly eat them and share them with others. We will strike back against the New World Order, and this is only one more initiative in our fight against them. So please join us at InfoWarsShop.com, or you can link through at InfoWars.com at the InfoWars Seed Center.